Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Zachary Bowman. I'm the manager of education and visitor experience here at the Samuel Dorsky Museum of Art. I want to welcome you to this talk with Juanita Lonzo and Stephanie Lindquist, the curators of the exhibition, which is currently at the Dorsky, Dos Mundos, Reconstructing Narratives, which presents the photographs of 12 artists of color who are recipients of photography fellowships from the fabulous organization Enfoco. Juanita Lonzo is a visual artist born in Puerto Rico, currently living in East Harlem. Her curatorial projects focus on emerging artists of color, especially women and the LGBTQ community. Her work was recently featured in group exhibitions at Longwood Art Gallery at Postos, Bronx Art Space, Wallworks, and Bullet Space. Stephanie Lindquist, also an artist, is a recent transplant to Minneapolis to pursue her MFA at the University of Minnesota. As director of Bronx Art Space from 2015 to 2019, she facilitated over 30 group exhibitions and initiated a new residency program and curatorial open call exclusively for Bronx residents. So I think without further ado, I'm gonna say welcome, Stephanie and Juanita. Thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to learn more about your process and the exhibition and the artists in the show.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Zach. Thank you to the Dorsky. Thank you to Enfoco for envisioning this project and inviting us to be a part of it. It's been a really meaningful process to engage with the work of these 12 artists for the last year. And as so much has changed in the world, it's, I think, given us time to reflect again and again about the work and new things that we're bringing to it. So yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you all.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you, Dorsky Museum, for helping us put in this wonderful exhibition. Zachary, Anna, that is in the co-wayne, Sarah, which also helped us with all the mechanics from behind, and Foco, Bill and Kathy, Kimberly, Ron Kavanaugh, and the artists that also made this possible. So I'm very happy to be here. Like Stephanie mentioned, this when we started this project, we had an idea of how things will turn. For our amazement and happiness, it exceeded our expectations. So we're very happy to share with you the process, the artists, the images, and all this other inside information. And we look forward for you to visit the Dos Mundos Reconstructing Narratives, which will be on view until November 22nd at the Dorsky Museum. We just want to start with this because the artists that we're working with were selected through the Enfoco Fellowship. 35 of them were invited to submit work that responded to the Dos Mundos exhibit, and we selected 12 of those 35 artists from 2016, 17, 18, and 2019. And the current fellowship is available at Enfoco's website. The deadline to apply is December 19th of 2020 by 11:59. It's actually done to submittable, and this is the sixth iteration of this fellowship. 10 artists are awarded $1,000. It also features an exhibition which will take place in 2020. It will be announced on February of 2020. Actually, there's a typo here on this slide. And they'll also be featuring Nueva Luz, which is a quarterly or biannual publication that is done by Enfoco. And in the slides, there's more information. But for additional information, you can send an email to fellowship@enfoco.org. I can send that later on the chat, or visit Enfoco's website, enfoco.org.
And this opportunity is open to all photographers of color within New York State.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you. Thank you for adding them.
Yeah, so this exhibition actually takes inspiration from the original Dos Mundos exhibition that opened in December 1973. It was called Dos Mundos, World of the Puerto Rican. And soon after that, about a year after that, the organization Enfoco began to form, and it's continued to evolve into the organization it is today. I think one of the values that Enfoco has carried throughout is kind of like this realization that artists of color were not being valued and supported to the extent they deserve, and that Enfoco could be a space for this. I should also say in the exhibition, there are 3 vitrines that we're looking at right now that show images from the original Dos Mundos World of the Puerto Rican exhibition.
This is the cover of the original Dos Mundos exhibition that Stephanie's referring to. I'm gonna go out of sequence because I'm vitrine number 1. There's some of the images that were inside that in the middle here. This is a photo by Charles Piacini. He was a founder of Enfoco, and he organized this exhibition, Dos Mundos, the original Dos Mundos exhibition from 1973 that gave birth to the Enfoco organization.
And Susan Laval has a really great essay in the Nueva Luz catalog that goes along with this exhibition that talks more extensively about this history. I actually pulled out a quote from it that really struck. She quotes a Latino photography's foremost scholar, Elizabeth Ferrer, who says that before Enfoco and before the rise of the civil rights movement, communities of color were portrayed almost exclusively by outsiders who would frequently sensationalize and exploit those communities in doing so. In contrast, the photographers of Enfoco turned a mirror on their communities, portraying the nuances of identity and the range of human experience. So this, I think, is a theme that continues with us today, of like holding up a mirror to their communities, to the nuances of identity in their communities.
Nueva Luz was a publication, and this is at the Dworsky Galleries as part of the exhibition. Nueva Luz is the publication where Enfoco photographers are published, and the first issue, which is presented here, is from 1984. And it was designed by Frank Impaya.
So yeah, let's jump into this theme of Dos Mundos. What does Dos Mundos mean? I think for the artists in 1973, Dos Mundos really meant the 2 worlds of the island of Puerto Rico and then New York and the US, and what those lived experiences looked like in those 2 very different worlds. I think Juanita and I, we spent some time kind of like stretching this and like, what are the ways we can think of Dos Mundos? To throw out some ideas, like we could think about Dos Mundos as being like the double consciousness that like Du Bois speaks of kind of like living in a world that doesn't recognize your identity and having to code switch depending in which rooms you're in. I think Dos Mundos can also reference kind of like these more internal multiple worlds, multiple identities, multicultural identities that we each carry within us.
I also wanted to add to that another thing within that could be the convention, what's conventional about that identity that is presumed, whether you're a person of color, African, Latino, diaspora, Asian, straight, queer, Latino, Latinx. So that's also within those, and we'll see that as we talk through the slides and we refer to the artists.
And yeah, and kind of, I guess the main theme that we really saw these 12 artists doing, as we have on this slide, is that they're really focusing our attention on like maybe the fringe of our public attention, places that are hard to look at, hard to encounter, hidden sanctuaries, subcultures, pain, home being far away, spirituality, transcendence, broken promises, especially when we think about political promises that are made to us, and myths around that. So this is the exhibition. As you walk in, so I'll just take maybe a quick circle around. And it also features really cool links. So if you click on individual works, you can also hear brief audio interviews that were done with each of the artists. So Juanita and I have kind of like thought of many themes that link these 12 artists. And then as we were like physically being installed in the space, all of a sudden we were seeing like new relationships just because of how they were with each other spatially. Some of the themes we want to talk about today that we've grouped the artists in are liberation, American myths, tackling patriarchy, and love. So to begin, we'll speak with Damaris. We'll speak about Damaris Alvarez, who has those very large scale prints on fabric hanging from the ceiling.
She's Cuban American. She self-identifies Cuban American, first generation. Our conversation was mostly in Spanish. And what is interesting is that she was working in a series. She was working in a series about capturing family visits in Cuba. Her father still lives in Cuba, so half of her paternal family lives there, and she's been going on those trips going back and forth. I wasn't aware of this work where she documented the underground punk scene in Cuba. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in Latin America, there was a, in Latin America, we have our own version of rock and roll, punk, and all these other music movements. But it's interesting because from what I recall, a conversation with her in Cuba, being that it's a socialist government, this is actually underground and considered outside the establishment, and it's not a popular subculture in Cuba. It's very underground, but it challenges and it goes against these stereotypes. So in other words, it is a rebellious counterculture within a left-leaning government. So it was very interesting. These are members of a band. This is Liban's room. And this is negra. And actually, just to clarify, negra is an endearment term in the Caribbean. It means black, and she's a woman, so she's called Black woman, and it's a term of endearment. She calls herself negra. Nobody's calling her that. That's the way she calls herself. They're part of a band called Streptococcus, which I believe is a bacteria, an infectious bacteria. But this is underground scene Cuban, and it's not considered, they're not well seen within that. So they're a marginalized group within the culture there. So this is information that I have on these images by Damaris. There's more that were exhibited at Longwood Gallery in 2019. So this is some of the works from the series Punk en las Calles.
Along with Damaris Alvarez, we're also thinking about the work of Cynthia Santos Briones, who has work called Living in Sanctuary, the series that's presented in the show, and then Daisha Harris, One More River to Cross. So we're kind of thinking of all these three artists together, thinking of what does it mean to liberate yourself? What does it mean to determine yourself, self-determination, independence?
These actually were taken between 2017 and 2018. And I recall seeing some of these at the Hemispheric Institute in New York City. What is interesting is that in 2017, I mean, there's always been these issues with immigration in the United States, but particularly there was a very aggressive stance from during the Trump administration. There was a Muslim travel ban, and some of these policies along the border get more strict. Cynthia noticed that there was a stronger position from those religious solidarity rising in the midst of this crisis, where many people seek and found sanctuaries in Catholic churches or other churches. It doesn't need to be a Catholic in particular. But for instance, this is a church in New Mexico. It's called Las Cruces, and that's why those crosses in the back. This one is really fascinating because this is Sujitmo Sajuti. He's actually Southeast Asian, and he was leading, I think it was Burma and he found sanctuary here in the United States. If you notice in the detail on the rock here, I believe this is like a Muslim rug. There's another photo of him doing prayer with his wife, but notice the ankle bracelet because he's not allowed to leave the church. And then on the third one here, these are two girls that are living in this church here, Dulce and her sister, and they're living in a church here in New York City. This photo was taken here in 2017.
And something that's really interesting about Cynthia and many of the other artists in the show is that they echo this commitment to human rights, to social justice outside of the studio, outside of their art practice. So Briones is also an activist, and I encourage you to check out her website. In this series, she also includes notes written by the subjects in the images talking about what is sanctuary to them. And she does other like audio, visual recordings.
Just interviews of some of these subjects too. So her background in journalism and her anthropology and journalism background also informs how she approaches the subjects of photographs and how extensively outside of photography she wants to document the artist. So it's really remarkable.
This series is really beautiful. One More River to Cross. Each of the titles is named after a Black folk song, which I encourage you guys to also, if you don't know these songs, to find them online and listen to them. I feel like it brings a lot of resonance to the images. Songs are talking about survival, they're talking about solidarity, they're talking about escape. And I know water is such an important metaphor for Paris, and there are many different ways we could think about this metaphor.
I think that another thing that really attracted me about her work, I was familiar with her work. She was doing these more like cyanotypic type of photographs combining, and there's something really, water, it's been a consistent element in her work as a metaphor, like you mentioned, and as a little way of crossing these borders. But I also noticed too that with this thing of crossing borders, it's interesting how this connects also to Cynthia and in a way also to Damaris, because she's kind of pushing the boundary as you cross water. It's not that easy to cross a river that's moving, and the metaphorical and literal act of that, it's so related to that thing of like crossing in order to achieve or attain freedom. And with her, this is a consistent vein. And I also love how by using these folk songs, she's preserving and honoring ancestors there, in particular that African-American tradition. So that's something that I find really poetic in her work. So.
And simultaneous to that, right, I think she's also paying homage to the people who continue this fight today, right? Like we have One More River to Cross, and that it is a type of this long ancestry.
Absolutely. I mean, this relates to the Black Lives Matter movement right now and how she's involved in activism in her community with policing and law and justice reforms that are happening right now in the Saratoga area. Saratoga Springs.
This next group of artists we're going to speak about Aaron Turner, Chen Chu, and Anthony Hambussi. We're thinking about them and like how, at least at this moment, how they're kind of pushing back against these like myths and narratives that were told from above about history, about art. So to begin, we have Aaron Turner, and his approach is really different from the other artists. He's thinking about what does it mean to be a Black artist? Who is a Black artist? He's using abstraction to do this. He's also thinking about what are the multiple ways we can think about Blackness materially. And so I think that's what he's doing by photographing these still lives, which often contain photographic material in them. This one is in particular Malcolm and Martin, and I find really fascinating because it's hidden, but we have portraits and mugshots of both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King And then overlaying this is this pattern that was developed by MacArthur Binion, who is a Black abstract painter. So I think it's really interesting what Erin is kind of maybe like questioning or asking us to do. You know, their identities are visually disguised, but these heroes still live in our mind's eye. So how are we still thinking about them, in our mind? Georgia 1892, Erin is actually tracing by hand this image of a lynching that took place in Georgia in 1892, and he's reflecting on this, right? Material as we like continue to struggle with white terror in this country. We see this triumvirate. We see JFK, we see Jesus, we see Martin Luther King, all heroes for many African American communities. And reflecting on our relationship to them, on their relationship to Blackness.
One of the things that I love about Aaron is how a Black identity is constructed through layering and composing, and it's relying on this abstract and at the same time very iconic symbolism, in a way that it connects to Daisha in the sense that through these very powerful metaphors, it's in this it's building this very unique African identity. And this is another one of these dualities that we identify in the artist, where he's referencing Aaron Turner is referencing another African American that is working with abstraction, which is Binion. Oh my God.
Binion, MacArthur Binion.
MacArthur Binion, thank you. I was going to say it backward, MacArthur Binion. So I was very attracted by the work because of that, because of the layering, the visual layering and the actual layering.
And next we have Chen Chu, who's an immigrant from Taiwan and brings a very distinct perspective to her time in America during the Trump administration.
Chen is also a photographer or lens-based artist, as she describes herself, that likes to use the camera to represent and show what America means to her. And she decided to leave New York after the national election where President Trump won in 2017, and she traveled to places like Texas, Arizona, Florida. And the reason why I'm pausing on these images, and I want to show you the third one, is that I love how she calls them a visual poem. And one of the things that I like is how they're in their simplicity, they're also charged with a lot of meaning here. I think you can see, you can recognize some of the symbols here. You can see this is actually a gun. These are taken in a shooting range, and they're part of a series called America Scene from 2017. And these two photographs here are taken in a shooting range, and actually these silhouettes here that are very blurred are the same ones here. And somehow this child, we don't know the gender, we don't know the race, we can make assumptions, but a shooting range is a place where you practice and you shoot with a rifle or a gun, and it's covering its ears. And one of the things that she shared in the audio during our studio visit over the phone was like, she saw this as a way of America fearing or not wanting to relate to its violence, or not wanting to relate to or feeling disturbed by it. So this is one of the readings that she wanted to give. She loves living here. She considers herself, this is her newfound home, and she's just using her camera as a way of understanding the political and social landscape here in the United States. This image was taken in Florida in a ferry, and for her it summarizes what America looks like. It's together and yet divided. So it has to do with the polarity in our emotions and in our political views.
I love looking at these images all together too, because it's also connecting for me, even in that first one, right? Connection between capital journalism, connection between violence, and then also connect like these daily comforts, right? And how are these things actually all tied together? Anthony Hambussi, he worked in the center at Surfside Gardens in the Coney Island housing projects for 15 years, and created relationships with the people that live there, and photographed the Coney Island housing projects and its environs for those years. And beyond this series, I think we see it in this series too, but he's really interested in literally photographing like structural racism. So we see like the dilapidation of the playground. We see the constant surveillance of the police tower. We see the never-ending scaffolding for repairs that never get fixed. So he's pointing to these like very real discrepancies. He's showing us the creek shoreline, which is being suffocated in trash, and this is very close to Coney Island, which is like this famous tourist destination. And how are these spaces being treated very differently? And so I think he's really showing us this so that we can start to see like, how do we dismantle this structure? Structural racism, it is a structure. It's not like a one-time event that happened. How do we begin to reckon with that?
One thing I wanted to add about Anthony Hambussi's work is how across projects, he has done projects here in New York and outside of New York, but it's interesting because I feel that I've been in these places. I live near different projects here. I mean, some of them don't look anywhere near these, the deterioration, the oppressive systemic way. It's so, I mean, it's meant to be there, to be put in place to help and structure the lives of people, and yet they defy that purpose. And that is captured, all these contradictions are captured in his images in a very stark way.
This next umbrella theme we're thinking about is tackling patriarchy. And we have two artists that are doing it in really different ways. We have Erica Murillo and we have Antonio Pulgarin. And I guess to begin with, Erica, Erica is a single mother, and she decided to document her relationship with her son, Amaru, until he was about 10. So this is a very intimate series between mother and child. Visually, she's really drawn to reflections, so we see that a lot. I think she's really trying to draw us into like this other dream world. And I mean, even in this, I guess I should say, like, there's something, she has a background in clinical psychology and sociology, and that really comes out to me when I look at these photos, because these are not happy-go-lucky family pictures. These are like psychological thrillers, and sometimes it happens, like even in that first image, like, the framing can be very violent, or even in this last image we see with the framing here, I think can be very violent, like his head is removed at the bottom. And there are other images in this series where we only get like certain parts of his body.
Sorry.
And then in the last image with the tree too, it's, I think the first time I looked at it, I was like, is he hanging from the tree? Like it's a somewhat disturbing image. But I think through this, she's really giving space that she and her son are co-creating their relationship together. And so I think the series for me kind of puts into question, like, what is parenthood? And what's the freedom and the restrictions that Amaru feels? And I know also that Murillo is also reflecting on her own childhood, which was very different from her son's childhood. And I guess maybe the last thing I'll say about this is that, while you can see this work as large prints, she's also made a really beautiful photo book of the entire series, umbral, which means threshold in Spanish. So I encourage you to go to her site and look at this book, check out the book.
One of the things when you first described this work to me and we were going over the images, I like how unconventional it feels, because it's kind of like she's navigating her own terms in terms of defining what that is. And I love the tension between fantasy and reality. Like that reflection, and it's kind of, it has a double meaning to it. It's an actual physical reflection created by light, absence of light, etc. But also it's a reflection as in thinking and looking back. Just to entice people, I'm just gonna go quickly over the images because there's something that I wanted to notice here. It's funny, Antonia had an exhibition last year at Kingsborough College. And it was created by a colleague and friend of mine, Edwin Ramoran, and the curatorial aspect happened remotely because Edwin is in Palm Springs, California. And when I visited Antonio, he was wearing this leather jacket. I didn't realize until he showed it to me, and we choose from that exhibition some of the works for Dos Mundos. And what is interesting is that he was telling me that he was named after an uncle of his from his paternal side of the family. And this is this gentleman here. So before, some days before he was born, his uncle died and he was named after, I feel that it honors tradition in the sense that it's kind of keeping with that tradition that men are named after, or maybe women too, after a relative or a recently deceased relative, in his case, his uncle Antonio. But with rebellion, leather jackets are so associated in American culture. And again, I'm mentioning Colombian side of the family. He was born here, but he considers himself, Antonio considers himself Latinx. So this is kind of like that duality that keep persisting and being entangled around a lot of the works and identities that we see. Having a name that is shared in the family. But with the leather jacket, I was thinking of James Dean and that idea of leather as being punk and rebellious. It's not, it's not wearing a suit, a tie, or a guayabera, or anything traditional in that sense. I find it as a very American icon fashion statement. So it honors that masculine tradition, but he's also very proud of showing a queer identity. He himself is a queer Latino man or Latinx man. I was just thinking of Erica and Antonio, since we grouped them together. And it's interesting how they are collaborating to some extent with their family members, maybe not in such a direct way, with Erica by documenting her journey through motherhood. And Antonio is using these photographs. I see Erica doing a composition of some sort that it's actually created by reflections and angles, while Antonio is doing that more like, but I was just thinking of patriarchy and how they challenge those identities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're both
in their own ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both inviting us into a world that's not dominated by stereotypical male rule restriction.
Yeah.
I think that's the way I kind of see them.
Yeah.
Against that.
And yet it relates to family. So I thought that was really interesting how you talked about pairing them that way. And I said, oh yeah, I never thought of that. So
just a new fun connection we could make. Yeah.
Say that again. What?
Just a new connection we can make, because I know we've kind of like grouped and regrouped the artists when we were talking about Erica and Antonio too, about how they're both presenting like very authentic good identities. These identities are not restricted. And I guess maybe to segue into this next section on like love and joy, photographers that are really showing their communities with a lot of pride. That these like fluid identities that might be rejected from the mainstream are very much a part of our community. And I think this next group of artists really show that, and they really embrace the diversity of their communities. And so this series, Danny, the best damn rap, he is visiting like a local studio in the South Bronx, where these like heroes of the hip hop scene are continuing their work. Juanita, what did Danny tell you about this community? I think I've actually visited this space like once.
So actually, I've never been in this space, and it's not currently operating, only via, you can actually catch episodes on Instagram, Guerrilla Group Radio. I can send the link on the chat. And what is fascinating is that when they were able to meet in person, it's a creative community for musicians, writers, people that are involved in the hip hop scene. And what is interesting is that maybe during the day, many of these individuals that are here, you can't see that, but there's a few women here also in the scene. These are African American or Afro-Caribbean Latino people that come, share. But I think one of the most important things about this space is that they are a creative community. They hold space. They break bread together. He also wanted to document a positive community and environment where all these exchanges take place in the Mudhaven area in the Bronx. So unfortunately, actually, there's a person here that vice versa. He died from COVID complications, asthma, this spring. So while he and I were talking about the work, we had another work that we wanted to use for the exhibition, but it wasn't as developed. And it was very interesting because he was saying that one of the things that he was not able to do was to join the scene because of COVID, and how much it meant to him that these were longtime collaborators. There's other people that are part of the scene, but I removed them because they're famous, and I didn't want them to I didn't want to exploit that side.
This is also an older community too, that I think kind of like looks back to like a golden era of hip hop. So they're like keeping that spirit alive. I really love this series, La Amiga Love, Wali Ovation. So in my conversation with Taubatis, I learned that the indigenous name for St. Kitts Nevis, where the artist is from, is La Amiga for St. Kitts and Uwali for Nevis.
I didn't know that.
That's the name of the series. And I think I was really attracted to the series because in a way, he's making these images for this community. You know, a lot of times artists are asked, like, who's your audience? And for this series, the audience is this community, Laimika and Wali. So he had and I'll say this too, Taubatis, he has like a documentary style portrait. He does portraits. He travels all over Latin America, taking portraits of the Black diaspora. And so this series is unique because this is home for him. So these are the community that has actually known him, and it's a small community. This is a community that's known him since he was a child. So that first image, I think, was of Brother Rainbow. So this is Rainbow. He captures in the street, and those buckets are boiled peanuts.
Oh, sorry.
And Brother Rainbow is, you know, on his way to a community festival to, you know, share boiled peanuts, sell boiled peanuts. And then in the next image, we have JJ, who is like, you know, just taking a moment to rest in the back of this vehicle, which is a hearse, which he drives to pick up the bodies of loved ones in his community. But I really love how he captures, and he talks about this too, but how he captures these men with such dignity. They go about their everyday tasks. And as a teacher at CUNY, I know that that is also kind of like at the forefront of his mind of like, how can I teach my students how to decolonize the camera? And I think he's exemplifying that. He's modeling that.
Exactly.
By prioritizing the dignity of his subject. Yeah, Amatullah Bahrain, who I think in some ways is doing very similar work. She also travels widely. Her subjects are a little different. she's really focused on Muslim women of the Black diaspora from Africa to America.
Mm-hmm.
And in that first image, we see Majeda with her, she's actually standing outside of a building which houses the mosque that she's a secretary.
Mm-hmm.
And she's standing here with her kamar flying, and she's wearing a face mask. This was taken earlier this spring, right as the pandemic hit the US. And yeah, but I mean, she's there. She has such pride. She looks like a complete heroine with her kamar blowing in the wind. And then in the next image, we have also 3 Muslim women of the Black diaspora, but this time we're in Lolodo, Senegal. And these are 3 tailors walking down the street.
Gorgeous.
And you can tell, you know, very different style, different ways of expressing their religion. But I think both capture like dignity and love, you know, within their communities. And, you know, as diverse as these women are, they're united through they're united through gender, and they're united through religion. And Bahrain is showing us how diverse that really looks. Outside of her art practice too, Bahrain is also doing the work of uplifting other African photographers through her curatorial work. And then we have Roger Richardson. Juanita and I had the pleasure of attending a roundtable discussion that Roger moderated at the Newburgh Community Photo Project. And there he's been working with and mentoring a group of young adults in photographing folks from their community in Newburgh. And that's one thing. But so I just mentioned that to say that, again, like Layla and many of the other artists, he is like echoing his studio work outside of his studio work. And so in this series, Let Me So Love, I think we really do see that love. He is a documentary photographer. He literally walks out on the street and introduces himself to strangers. So in this series, we're in Orange County, New York, and he's getting to know his fellow citizens. And something that you can't really see in the images, but I find really, really interesting is that this city, like many cities, is really plagued by very deep racial divisions and economic divisions. But rather than focus his lens on that, Rogers decided to focus his attention on human connection and on empathy and on compassion. And I think we can see that in how he likes so romantically capture these people with such soft light. So yeah, these are all of the artists in Dos Mundos reconstructing narratives to hear questions and comments.
Is there a catalog? There's not a printed book. We have a printed guide. The exhibition website on Infoco's page does have images. It has the recordings of the artists talking about their work. There is going to be a version of Nueva Luz, right? Am I right about that? Or
yeah. So, you know, the reason why I mentioned Nueva Luz, and I did a very poor job talking about Nueva Luz, but Nueva Luz is such an important publication that Enfoco created in 1985. It publishes the work of photographers. In fact, I became familiar with some of the works before I even knew about it because of Nueva Luz and how far it reaches. And actually, so the Dos Mundos exhibition, our catalog is the Dos Mundos. You know what? I don't have if I find a shot of the catalog, I'll share that with you, but I can also share the link to the website. But our Nueva Luz feature of this fall is the exhibition catalog for Dos Mundos.
So Glinda Lise has a question about how you divided the themes. How did you come up with the 3 that you did, and how did they relate to the original Dos Mundos?
The first Dos Mundos show was very different than this Dos Mundos show. The first Dos Mundos show was all male, and Puerto Rican. So I think Enfoco has really changed since then, and has seen that it's really valuable to kind of have this solidarity amongst photographers of color more generally.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big change, and maybe like it's a little difficult to maybe to compare them. I think it's a little bit apples and oranges.
Also, the context is different. When this exhibition, when the original Dos Mundos happened in 1973, you know, Puerto Ricans have been in New York maybe 10, 20 years before that, but it was like that critical junction that some civil rights policies were put in place. You know, it came after the Young Lords. It came after a lot of like grassroots initiatives, cemented some organizations within that community, and artists found a place where they could exhibit and showcase their work. Like Stephanie mentioned, and it was an all-male exhibit. I don't think that was intentional. It was a reflection of the times and of the moment. And I do see that it relates to the original, the show now, in the sense that there's all these stories and there are these identities and racial issues or gender issues that are still need to be sorted out. So in that regard, it does relate. But I think the new exhibition reflects the demographics. It reflects how diverse the art scene is and how much progress, or how more open you could say it is, and how many artists of color, men, women, or from you know, of any I lost my train of thought. It bears within that diversity things are now. So I think it's a reflection of that.
Yeah, and maybe, yeah, to piggyback on that, the first exhibition too, I think it was celebrated as being like this great human document, like to
Yeah.
the humanity of the Puerto Rican. And I think in some ways, yeah, that is, I think is still valued by Enfoco and vision of just simply showing the humanity and value of diverse people. But yeah, I think it's become, yeah, the stories changed, the context changed.
When Charlie was here in conversation with Bill, you know, one of the things that he talked about with sort of the impetus to create Enfoco was the fact that you saw images of Harlem, for instance, but those images were taken by really white male photographers, and so there was a need to see images of the community that were created within the community, and I think that a lot of the tenderness that people like with some of the work was seeing was because of they're telling their own stories, you know, and I think that really comes through. So there's another there's a comment Joe was saying, looking at the photos by Chen triggered the saying, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. And that's what popped into his head. It said like seeing America was also pointing out our blindness to ourselves.
When Stephanie was talking about the themes, I was just thinking how interesting. I was thinking of the American dream. And, you know, I think that means so many things for people. I was thinking of equality and how what seems so obvious for some people because of exclusion for whatever you want to say, race, gender, national identity, or religious affiliation, it could mean something for different people, and how that used to be maybe like a gold standard back then. I grew up with some of that from Puerto Rico, like people thinking, well, when you go to America, these things will look so different. And when you come here, I mean, I'm an adopted New Yorker, so I think I will stay here. But it's interesting how that will mean something. And of course, for me that I live in New York, maybe if I were in Florida, or if I were in Montana or in another state, that would be something completely different.
When we're talking about like putting this mirror up and these photographers going out and documenting their own communities, it's not only important for their communities, it's actually also very important, I think, for white audiences too, right? That we shouldn't deprive audiences of a true knowledge of their country and the people around them. So I think it's important for many people to engage this work.
So what are you working on next as artists yourselves, as potential curations of how has the quarantine affected you? I have a lot of questions. Any of those three, anyone you want to answer, go ahead.
Quarantine has actually been a really busy time. I've actually been very social. I've met a lot of people, and that's partially because I volunteered this summer with a group called Growing North Minneapolis, which stewards like gardens in North Minneapolis. So I've been outside tending to plants with elders and youth, and that's actually becoming a much a larger project. So over the next year, I'm going to work with them to transform this camper into a veggie stand for the youth to sell their produce. And we're also going to work with the youth to get them prepared to like facilitate community conversations to envision 3 new murals at garden sites. So,
so cool.
Yeah, I think I had this intention before quarantine, but I think the pandemic has just highlighted how important these connections and relationships are. So I'm just really digging into getting to know my neighbors and trying to find ways of working in solidarity with them.
I still don't know what that means. I was one of those people that thought that it was going to be okay in 2 weeks. So I had these, I was teaching for Student School, and Glenda Liz knows about this place, but I have to teach myself how to make videos and use technology. So it's quite an experience. I don't think I'm good, but they nevertheless use what I gave them. But also I was working with Unfoco on a couple of other exhibitions for the Apartment Gallery series, and the shows went virtual. I was actually finalizing some of the details of this exhibition with Stephanie because the show was getting ready to be shipped to you guys at Dorsky. So we put some care into that because we really believe in the show and it relates to our internal politics and the way we see things. Also, I do think it's very important that art from within those communities is presented and presented in a very quality, in the highest quality possible, whatever that means. And by that, I don't mean college educated or anything like that. I mean that the sincerity of the work, we see that there. So I kept myself busy with those things, and I had time to paint, which I'm like, what? So I did a lot of small and big artworks. I'm teaching myself animation, stop motion, and I'm a mother of an 11-year-old boy. That's sort of easy because he learned to use the computer, and he's very good at connecting and following. I think it's been really hard on him because he's an introvert. And a lot of the routines that he had with school are gone. So I think he's not telling us, but I think for him, he's afraid we'll get COVID and we'll just die. And, we're reckless. We go out, we ask people, do you need something from the store? Like, we try to live our lives. We live in East Harlem, so it's a very, Glenda Liz knows, it's a very, it's lively in here. People are like out there. And so, we don't want to live with fear, but we want to be careful of vulnerable neighbors that we have. There's asthma in my building, but we wanted to live on, to carry on, to try to keep a routine of some sort. So I will say that it's one of those things that shows you how bad things are, but how better can they get to. So I'm optimistic, and I hope that at some point things get better, or we get stronger and we can kick harder. One thing that I was gonna mention about this show is that the more we look at these images, the more things we see. When Stephanie was talking to me about the themes, I'm like, what? And it was fascinating because we see the work differently, and we hope that as people see the show, as they get the catalog, as they visit Unfoco's website, I put the link on the chat so you guys can see the virtual exhibition, and I hope you can make it up to New Paltz. And a lot of things. I see connections between the artists, and I see how we can process this very awkward reality that we live in, and then we can sort out all these other issues. So
Craig asked a question about earthquakes in Puerto Rico and more people living here in the U.S. How may that impact your work? And I'm wondering if you're talking about sort of migration of people to the U.S. and how that might impact your work as curators or artists.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I'm. I don't think I'm sure how to answer that. I mean, part of our team is in Puerto Rico. Part of the Infoco team is in Puerto Rico, so I can. But you know, all of the works were coming. All of the artists are stateside, and most of them are not Puerto Rican. So I'm not sure if they're feeling any direct impact from the earthquakes there.
Actually, and also just to clarify, the earthquakes are in the southwest of the island. That's where the epicenter is. It's actually towards like the ocean. It's a weird thing, but we're sitting on a tectonic plate, if I'm not mistaken, and there's always been seismic activity in the island. I never felt that because you get used to it, but it's stronger, and it's the places are shifting. Someone told me from the geological department on one university there. There's been a lot of structural damage in Guanica, Ponce, like towards the southeast of the island. I think environmentally speaking, a lot of places are going to be unfortunately affected by sea levels rising, hurricanes, fires, droughts, displacement. And that will be reflected in our work of the artists and their activism. So that will be an interesting, I mean, our works don't have to look a particular way, they just have to tell a story, engage, and reflect a reality, I think. So it will be interesting to see how a lot of that climate change is already showing. I mean, in Anthony's work, I see it all over the place, all that decay and all that. I think all these things that are a problem are in our work of artists organically. Even if it's abstraction there. So
the work is, insofar as it's tied in with community involvement and community activism, and that the artist's work doesn't end up in artwork. You know, that so many of the artists are also activists, are also involved in organizations in their community that are fighting for justice in a way that the artwork sort of represents. And even Stephanie was talking about her. You were, Juanita, we're talking about how you're involved in your community. And so that to me has been the most meaningful part of learning about the show. I mean, the work itself, it's strong, it stands alone. But when you learn about these artists and how they are not just artists, but they're community members. I mean, that to me is such a key point of what Infoco has been doing, you know, for years, of the founding of what Infoco is about, supporting community, right?
Yeah.
So that to me is just something that's very, very special about this show, and that's, I think, why it's so special that you two were the curators, because it's, you know, it's something that y'all are doing. The show will travel to other SUNY museums and galleries over the next year. So more opportunities to engage with Stephanie and Juanita. Also, the other programs that we're hosting here. But unless anybody else has a question or comment, Stephanie and Juanita, thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody that's here, thank you. Bill, I see that you're here. I don't know if you're actively here, but Bill, thank you. Bill Aguado.
It was such a pleasure working with Juanita and Stephanie. And it was the reason you mentioned their community engagement, their experience, that I found so relevant to the concept of the exhibition. And I invited them to be the co-curators. And I think for 99% of the time, I stayed out of their way. I think, except when they wanted money, which was always a problem. But it was an absolute delight working with them. And the reason as you described them, is the reason why they were selected. because of their integrity, because of their relationship to communities, because of their understanding of the issues within the communities and for the artists. You know, I'm the one that's honored, and it's been, and I have plans for Stephanie. She thinks she's in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis is a suburb.
She's coming back. She has to come back.
And here is Revolution, the book. I don't know if you can see it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you so much, Kathy, the entire Infoco team, the entire Dorsky team. Thank you so much, Zach, for moderating today.
Thank you.
Very grateful to chat with you and be here today with you.
So really quickly, we're going to, after Dorsky, Fredonia. Then we're going to be Binghamton, Stony Brook. I believe that's the order. So we're excited about that. Also, I want to give a shout out to my friend Damaris Marrero and Luchesca Cotto from Puerto Rico. They're watching me. So I want to say thank you for being here today. That's it. I got sentimental. My mom is not here in the chat, so so she won't see this. But anyway, thank you. Thank you for everything. And thank you, Bill, for believing in us and not thinking, what are they doing? You probably did, but it was fun. It's always fun to work with Bill. So thank you.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.